As a leader, you should build an organization to be able to function once you leave there. You should leave it better than you found it because it's a stewardship. But if you built an organization where it needs you to survive on, you didn't have workers or followers, you had hostages. And so, you want to create an environment where you can create leadership.
Where I want to start with this, and I actually have a third book that I'm writing right now. It's a leadership book. You wrote a leadership book. How many leadership books are out there? Thousands, tens of thousands, actually. So, what do you think was missing that led you to write this book? And I have to say, in reading it, I've read so many leadership books. Almost none of them pack the wisdom that yours does and the practical application approach. It's fantastic. But what did you see missing that you wanted to do this?
Yeah, it really, started from a conversation I had a couple of years ago with my teenage grandson who was visiting at the time. And it was a news night, Lee, where, everything was bad. There was, elected officials behaving badly. There were CEOs behaving badly, religious leaders behaving badly. And he said, "Pops, you're a leader. Is that how you lead?" Um, and I said, "Wow, are we really setting the right example for our young people?" And so I did some research, and I found an Edelman Trust Barometer survey where they interviewed 38,000 people, and 7 out of 10 said they don't trust the government or the media or the journalists or business leaders to tell them the truth. Pew Research did a public trust in government survey, 1958 to 2025. And in 1958, 73% of Americans trusted the federal government to do the right thing. That number today is 17%. And so that said to me that, hey, we have moved away from what we thought or talked about servant leadership to something that's much more nefarious, self-serving leadership, where we're no longer necessarily leading with integrity and trust and truth. And that's just not sustainable in the future. And so it was my way of saying, hey, let me document this, codify this, my thoughts for that next generation of leadership, or even the existing leadership that wants to become uncommon leaders.
Okay, yeah, I actually think the biggest deficit on the planet is we don't have enough leaders that are both capable and moral. And it's really changed. And I say, capable of doing the job they were hired to do. There's a lot of very capable leaders that are immoral, that are capable of doing the wrong things. And so I'm seeing it as well. I always think about, I've started 8 different companies from scratch, and, some of them had as little as 10 employees, some of them well over 500. So never playing in the big spaces that you were at. But I always thought that I created the environment from which everybody created as much value as they chose to create. And I wanted it to be energizing. And I always thought, for me, self-serving was also creating how I felt, emotional energy, spiritual or connectedness, value. And I always made more money than almost all of my peers by doing what you talk about in the book. So I thought of it as being selfish in a really healthy win-win way, doing what's in my best self-interest. Um, does that resonate with you and how I describe that?
It resonates from the standpoint of, it's all the foundation of all of this is trust. And my formula for trust is character times competency times consistency. And what you just described is that you had a character that, even though it was self-serving to some extent, it did not exclude the people that worked for you. It was really a team effort. And when you do that, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so, we have to understand that we can raise both performance and people at the same time. It's not an either or proposition.
And it has to be all of us. I've always thought of it that way. And the largest company that I sold, it was in 2016, $100 million business, very profitable. Actually it was aviation aftermarket. We repaired and overhauled parts. We had 2,000 customers in about 60 countries, and it was just absolute incredible business. And we got a 21.6x multiple of EBITDA when 8x would have been strong in that, because we created value and developed our leaders the way you describe in your book. And I think one of the things that makes your book so powerful to me is you say in your book, stay current to remain relevant. You're still doing the work. You're on the front lines. You could feel that in every single page, in a world of so many experts that are out there talking about something they probably couldn't do to save themselves because they're just disconnected from those front lines. So talk about that. Talk about staying relevant and how important that is.
It's so important. I've been fortunate enough, my entire career has been with companies going through change and transformation. And probably the biggest of which was the last one at Walmart, where we were trying to change from a brick and mortar retailer to a e-commerce omni-channel retailer. And the way you do that and the way you drive that type of value is you make sure that you speak and connect with the front line and that they understand the vision and the direction. And I'll just give you a little example. When I got to Walmart, the whole engine, the whole ecosystem was brick and mortar, and it was very hard initially to help that hourly associate understand why we were making these changes. All they thought was a job loss or what have you. And I gave them a real simple story. I used to work at the number one retailer in the world in 1978, 79. Who was that? Sears, Roebuck and Company. And I shared with them back then, Sears was Amazon and Walmart together because they had their brick and mortar stores, but they had their catalog where you could order it, get it delivered at your home or at the store. And I said, how many of you have ever shopped at a Sears lounge? And very few hands went up because they were out of business. And I said, we have got to react the same way. The customer buying habits have changed. And oh, by the way, this is why we have to make that change. And let me tell you why you are important to that. And we talk about things like a cashier. You're the last line of defense of a shopping experience. If a customer has a great shopping experience and she goes to check out or he goes to check out and you're pleasant and it's quick, fast, and friendly, that customer will not only come back, but they'll come back and they'll put one more item in the basket. I said all that to say one more item in the basket at $5 an item means more hours. We need more cashiers. We need more baggers. We need more stockers. And so that's how you win. And once they connected themselves to that vision, that's where the value creation came because they start looking for ways to, add value, looking for ways to make this experience a lot better.
Yeah, I love the story in the book about Chicago and that community and Walmart, and everybody got together at corporate or wherever in management and said, "Hey, this is the best thing to do, and we're gonna, put self checkout in, and we're gonna do all this stuff." But we didn't connect to the community, didn't really think about the persona of the consumers coming in. Briefly talk about that story because I would have thought that would have been just part of the operating model at Walmart that you analyze community and the shoppers more thoroughly before you go in. But yeah, talk about that. It was great.
Yeah, I think that, we were very successful transitioning customers from, man checkout to self checkout. And those who liked it was a convenience play. And so probably 60% of our shoppers really loved that. And so after we got into Chicago, we went to remodel these stores, in a way to make it convenient for the customer. The edict was, hey, let's put in all self checkouts. I pushed back on it, did not win that battle. But very quickly, the customer spoke and they voted. And more importantly, the CEO came to visit, and I said, "Hey, look, what do you see odd about this?" He goes, "There's only self checkouts." I said, "Yeah." I said, "We need to fix that because there's this 80-year-old woman. She's not going to, know how to measure her bananas or her apples on the scale. And there are other customers who just say, 'Hey, that's your job. I'm not doing it.'" And so, it took getting that feedback and talking to the frontline associates who, said, "Hey, this is inconvenient. It's also possibly a theft magnet. So let's look at doing this the right way." And so we went back, and that was a case where technology was, "Hey, let's use this technology because it's convenient, it's fast." But it wasn't what the constituent needed.
Yeah, makes sense. And you started using local suppliers to remodel the store, so you really connected with the community. What did that do? And I'm sure you measured it in some way, but what was the measurable impact of loyal customers coming into Walmart?
Yeah, it's interesting. And so, when we got there, we met with politicians, religious leaders, and they said, "Hey, Walmart, we don't need you to be just in our community. We want you to be of the community." And that looks like hiring, contractors from the neighborhood, the South and West Side, to do the construction. That finding uh, HVAC and electricians and plumbers who are from the community to do that work. What that did was it created a sense of ownership within the community. And so people would say, that's my Walmart because my uncle cuts the grass there. That's my Walmart because my mother is the person who does the plumbing and the electrical there. That's my mall. And so it created this sense of ownership, almost a symbiotic relationship between the community and the stores. And you'd be amazed. I mean, little things would happen where trash all of a sudden that used to be all over everything wasn't there anymore because, hey, pick this up, and so it really was a lesson in what can happen when you work with a community and stop doing something to a community.
Yeah, I love that you went to the thought leaders, the community leaders that were right there and made them partners in this, and it worked. Most companies probably don't do that.
I've learned that listening is really, I call it a discipline, and it's really a leadership advantage if you take the time to listen. Something as simple, Lee, as when I go to stores and just visit to check up on them, there's two questions I ask every hourly associate I come into contact. Tell me the three things we're asking you to do that makes no sense whatsoever. It's creating work, not adding value. And oh, by the way, tell me the three things or three products that if we had, we'd sell more of this or we do more of. And we got some great ideas, everything from in our Latino communities to make sure our overhead announcements were both in English and Spanish. In our culture communities, making sure that we had a proper selection for those customers. We became kind of hyper focused to local. And that only happened because we talked to those hourly associates on the ground who do the work every day.
I love that. At kind of a high level, how do you think about a business management operating system or model in larger companies? So I wrote a book a few years ago titled Your Most Important Number, where every team will pick the number that best describes the value that they should be creating. So it simplifies, and you talk a lot about simplifying and the power of it, and I 100% agree. And it didn't matter whether it was 10 teams, 1,000 teams. When they create that value, it rolls up and increases the value of the business. How does a big company think about that? Because usually it's described the way you're saying it. Oh, we want to have the vision, and we want to say this, we want to ask questions, but it's got to be more than that to ensure that everybody's doing the right stuff. So, what are your insights there?
Yeah, one of the best experiences I had with that was at IBM. And what they would do is actually, if you came up with an idea that was either a cost savings for the company, a cost savings for the customer, or a value add, you would actually get a percentage of whatever that savings was or whatever that value add was. And it was a motivation for us always to be thinking about the best way. So something as simple as, hey, we have 5 color printers on this floor. We really don't need to print everything in color. Let's take out 4, replace those with black and white only, and only use the color printer for what we need it to do. And you don't get that sitting in the ivory tower. You don't get that from home headquarters. You get that, from the associates. And if you get them to understand the business model, how we make money, the fact that I'll use grocery retail, that, our general merchandise is where all the margin is. But people eat every day, so we have to have everyday low pricing on groceries. They get it. I think we need to give our people more credit that they understand a lot more than what we think they do. And absent of telling them the truth or telling them what's really going on, they'll make up their own reality, which is usually wrong and worse than reality.
Yeah. And in a large company, how does each team member know what they should be doing every single day?
Yeah, you have to, and take a grocery store. We go into, the bakery department and say, hey, here's the track record over the last 3 years of how many donuts we sold today. Let's beat that by 10%. Let's beat that by 20%. And do that by every department. Hey, cashiers, last year, you got a customer satisfaction score of X, Y, and Z. Hey, let's try and top that today. And this was a daily occurrence, daily huddles where we would have these messages so that people knew what they were up against. And there was reward and recognition when they achieved or overachieved.
Were the huddles first thing in the morning, throughout the day? How did you set that up?
Yeah, well, you had 3 huddles because there were typically 3 shifts. And so you had your morning huddle, and if you ever fall into a Walmart store and you hear people kinda doing this cheer, it's called the Walmart cheer. And every huddle started with it, "Give me a W, give me a A, give me a L," and it spelled Walmart out. And so there'd be one in the morning, say about 7 or 8 o'clock. There'd be another one around 3 o'clock, and the last one would be about 7 or 8 o'clock during these handoff meetings, so that we were communicating, "Hey, we're behind on dairy today. Let's try and make up for it, make sure we're stocked at 4 o'clock when mom goes to pick up the kids." And again, helping them understand. We're not telling you to be stocked at milk at 4 o'clock because we just think that's a good time. Research has shown that moms pick up their kids, certain times, and they'll go stop by the store. We want to be ready when they get there.
In the overall sort of mission, lower prices, better life. I'm probably paraphrasing a bit there, but I love that. And it sounds like Walmart's really stuck to that.
That actually goes back to the founder, Sam Walton, right? It was everyday price to help people save money and live better. So that's basically the strategy. Now, how that plays out is to two things called EDLC, everyday low cost, and everyday low price. Everyday low cost says we source these products and services at the best possible price to save money, and then we take those savings to make sure we're offering our customers the lowest price we can. And it's just that simple. Now, we did add another wrinkle to save them time when we became e-commerce because, again, people want to shop when they want, where they want, and how they want. And so we save money, save time, and live better. But that is just that simple.
Yeah, Amazon has really turned that whole world upside down. So keeping up with it, a big challenge. So one question I have, because I completely agree around integrity, slipping and a lot of challenges out there. Like what's causing it to slip? And usually when I see it, and I get to work with a lot of businesses. I'm CEO of two companies today, and the ones that I sold, when it comes to money, that's where you see it. And I feel like, I've been in a position many times because of my position, I could cut a corner, get an advantage that wouldn't be the right thing to do, but I never did it, like just never, because I think the long term implications of that are just terrible. And as I sort of alluded to earlier, it's always made me more money than the vast majority of my peers doing the same stuff by showing up this way. Why, from your view, is integrity slipping in leadership? You know, um, a decade over a decade for the last couple of decades, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, you can actually go back to something as simple as the ratio of the CEO's salary times the average hourly worker. Probably 20, 25 years ago, it was 28 times the salary of a hourly worker. Now it's over 250 times that. So one, there's a lot more at stake. Secondly, and as well as I do, in the for-profit world, you have these quarterly reviews and analyst meetings, and you have the short-term focus of doing what you have to hit that number, be it the, even the ROI, whatever it is. And so there's a short-term focus that if people aren't grounded, can make them cut corners, to your point, to make the number look good for Q2, to make the numbers, or we downplay the headwinds that may be coming, right? And those are things that really will come back and bite you. And so I think it's the short-term focus, one. I also think that we tended to, in many cases, put leaders in place, not necessarily because they were the most competent, but because they were the most charismatic. We got into this society now of, social media and clicks and likes. And, I see it a lot in the political screen. I see it a lot in the faith-based community that, charisma kind of wins. But the biggest thing is that the boards and the leaders began to look the other way as long as the results were coming in the way they needed to. They were okay with the what, didn't think too much or care about the how, and that comes back to bite you. The how is just as important as the what, and so it goes back to, I say, you can lift performance and people at the same time, but you can also walk with integrity. Nobody wakes up in the morning and say, I'm gonna go to work and steal something, or I'm gonna go to work and go to a game tonight and be caught on a kiss cam with my worker. I mean, I think these are little things that happen over time, and you get too far away from that line, you almost can't get back to it.
Yeah, and it starts probably small, so just never make that choice. You know what? One of the biggest very short story, but one of the biggest changes in sort of my career trajectory had a aerospace large manufacturer. The purchasing department, it was pretty corrupt, and one of them told my sales guy at the time, this is back in 92, 93. I want an all expense paid trip to Las Vegas whenever I want. And if I don't do it, I'm going to cut you guys off. And they were 90% of our business. So I said, no, that's ridiculous. They figured out a way to divert the work to somebody else that would do that. And we lost 90% of the business over time. My boss said, close it or sell it. I couldn't find anybody to buy it. And I said, well, let me take it over. I'll assume the debt. It was about 600 grand in total. I want to go this way. He didn't believe in it, didn't think I could do it, and it worked out, and that grew into 23 years later into a really nice, well into 9-figure exit for me. Imagine if I didn't follow your advice in the book, or just what felt right to me.
Exactly. I think that type of leadership that you demonstrated, I call it uncommon leadership, creates a culture of trust and accountability. It creates sustainable success, higher retention, deeper engagement, better customer sat. I mean, it's just a win-win for everybody. And too often, it's that short-term approach that gets us in trouble. It's the Wolf of Wall Street mentality that, more is better. And so I think that, as we move out of this, hopefully this self-serving arena and get back to servant leadership with this next generation, the Gen X's and the Ys, that hopefully they get us back to where we need to be.
And I do believe leading the way you talk about in the book, and it's how I've always done it over time, maybe not in the very short run, but over time, it's made me a lot more money as well. And in the salary gap that you're talking about, in that one company I described, it was 10 years before I was the highest paid person. And even at the end, I think my salary was probably $300,000, right around there. But I was making long before that millions of dollars a year just because I own the majority of. For me, it was all performance based. If we make it, I get something. We don't make it, I don't deserve it. That's how I thought about it.
No, 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 and that's the right way to think about it. This can't be just all about Lee Benson or all about Keith Wyche. It's about that team. I still say that the most precious thing on anybody's balance sheet is human capital, the people that are there doing that work for you day in and day out. And we lose sight of that sometimes. People become pawns or cogs, and the reality of it is that none of us, when I ran 30,000 people who worked for me at Walmart when I ran the Northeast region. Those weren't just numbers. Those were people. They had families. And you have to respect that.
Yeah, I've always thought their lives are just as important to them, if not more so than yours is to you. So remember that when you're in there. And these are with leaders. And I remember at the end, I think I had 64 leaders when I sold that one business. And I spent over half my time developing my leaders. That's where I spent my time at the end. In the beginning, it's 80 hours doing whatever it needs to be done. But at the end, it was all about developing the people. And there are dozens that I follow that went on to do amazing things in leadership roles. And I've heard you talk about that too, that's what you're most proud of. And that's what fulfills me. I mean, that really fills my cup when I think about it. It's like, this is so cool. And that goes to the last chapter in your book.
Yeah, yeah. I talk about planting trees that you'll never sit under. I think at the core, a leader has many jobs, but one of those jobs is to make sure that they're developing future leaders. And creating a legacy, living the legacy actually in real time. And so I like to look back and see, whose lives, have I touched. I have this, I call it my mentoring tree. And I've seen so many of my former mentees surpass me even from an accomplishment standpoint. And, two, three generations later, their kids. And so it's really something to look forward to. To me, it's one of those things where as a leader, you should build an organization to be able to function once you leave there. You should leave it better than you found it because it's a stewardship. But if you built an organization where it needs you to survive on, you didn't have workers or followers, you had hostages. And so, you want to create an environment where you can create leadership. And I didn't always do that. I'll be honest with you. At times in my leadership career where, I had to learn the hard way that, hey, you can't be the bull in the china shop and you have to, have compassion and humility when working with people. But the good leaders get there eventually, and you want to make sure that you pass that down.
Yeah, I changed in a lot of ways, almost in line with your book and how you're talking about doing things, because I needed to get better results, and I needed to feel better as a human doing all of this. And that's why I talk about this holistic value. Yes, the money's important, cash flow, live by that. But emotional energy, scarcest commodity on the planet to me, X factor for leaders, and then spiritual value creation and connectedness. Like I want all the employees to have each other's backs because they want to, because of the environment that we created. I don't think you know this, but in 2011, Jack Welch became my business partner in Execute to Win, one of my companies, ETW. And I met him in 2008. We became, very good friends. But he was always huge on how you make the numbers, especially towards the end, is pretty much more important than you have to make the numbers. But if how you do it is wrong, this whole thing's going to crash over time. So I loved having those conversations, right? I know you referenced him in the book.
Oh, absolutely. And to your point, it's just not sustainable to have those types of results. And Jack did great work. One thing I loved about Jack too was he was big on accountability and holding his leaders accountable. So again, it wasn't just how you get what the number you got, it was how did you get there? How many people did you develop on your team? What's your succession planning look like? I mean, so it was a lot of more than just, hey, did you hit the number? The stock price, do what it's supposed to do. And we need more leaders like that. The other thing I talk about in the book too is making sure self-care as a leader. I think too often if we're not careful, we'll burn ourselves out, not understanding that we do have to have some type of, I call it, spiritual reflection, emotional, mental, physical, and all those things need to be nurtured to be your whole self. You can't serve from an empty cup. And so that's really also important. A lot of leaders neglect their health and, those types of things, but it's not a healthy thing and it's nothing that I recommend.
Yeah, I actually time block about 3 hours every morning. I get up early around 4 o'clock. So even after my time block for self-care, the way you're talking about, it's exercising, it's learning, it's all of it. I bet you on average, I get more time throughout the day. I probably spend 2 to 3 hours a day developing myself, getting ready and learning from people like yourself and others on my podcast where I weekly guest, but also other books and lectures and learning about industry. But this self-care is important to me, and the personal development piece is crazy important, especially the older I get. I qualify for Medicare in a couple months, so I've arrived, but I'm still not slowing down, and I love being in the game. How do you do that for yourself, and how do you advise leaders that you've worked with to make sure they're getting the self-care right?
Yeah, well, unfortunately for me, I had to get it right because I had some health issues, about 10 years ago because I didn't get it right. I was, burning a candle at both ends. And so it was a wake up call to me. And so, from there, I learned to really, to your point, set aside a certain amount of time for self care every day. It got to the point I no longer took the phone everywhere I went. It wasn't on the nightstand at night and those types of things. And I just put some guardrails and some boundaries around. And what I found was interestingly is when I put those boundaries and guardrails in there, my bosses didn't complain. They understood. And so some of it was my own, inner issues or inner insecurities of having to work so hard. And, I don't want to this quarter to be worse than last quarter. And so it took that. But, again, I live my life now and I'm ahead of you in the Medicare game. I'm already there. But I take care of myself now for Keith 5 years from now. Right. So 5 years from now, when I'm, 70 something, hey, I'm taking care of me now, eating better, those types of things.
Well, your energy is way younger. I mean, that's how you show up here today, so that's nice. And all the interviews I've listened to you. Um, so the leadership book I'm going after, I've been wanting to run this by you since I started listening to you and reading your book. I feel like we're leveraging data, emotions, capability, and wisdom. Because I feel like knowing what to do is relatively straightforward. Well, how come so many have a hard time actually doing it? And so I'm really trying to jump into that, but I feel like it's those four things that I'm just sort of, wrestling and leveraging and guiding and making the right decisions to nudge this value creation machine in the direction that we want it to go. Whatever the organization is, for profit, nonprofit, government, it really doesn't matter. Does that resonate with you when I think about that? It's, getting
It,
data
it, it does. Yeah.
all the
And I think
emotion. Yeah.
we need to give people also a lot of that gets stifled when you don't give people the opportunity or the freedom to fail or again within reason try new ideas and explore other alternatives and ways to do it. And so if you fail, of course you fail fast and fail forward, but people need that safe space to do these types of things, to expand and try. I'm real big on intellectual curiosity and staying current to remain relevant. But some of that has to be in this environment where, hey, it's okay to try something different as long as there's a rational, reasonable uh, rationale for why you did it.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the subtitles in your book I remember was "You Can't Teach Intellectual Curiosity." Um, can you develop it? I've certainly become a whole lot more curious the older I get.
I think it can be developed. I think, there's a friend of mine who has this joke that if you hang around, nine people who are broke, you'll be the 10th one. And so I think it also is around, who do you surround yourself with? Iron sharpens iron. And so, even as a CEO or leader, you need those folks around you who push you, who challenge you. And then when you see the results early on, I mean, that's what did it for me. When I start seeing the increased results, be it anything from, weight training in the gym, to sales leadership at IBM, when I saw that this was working, creating more value, when I saw that if I was well read, I was able to easier talk to senior leaders about what was happening. And so it made me a more well-rounded individual. So I think it can be stirred up within someone, that intellectual curiosity. And again, I'm a people person. So I believe if I believe in this person and they realize I believe in them, they will accomplish more than probably they even thought they could, or even I thought they could, just because you believe in them and give them that opportunity.
I feel like there's very few leaders that show up with somebody else's potential. That's the way I think about it, like really believing in them. That's how I show up with kids when I work with, I've worked with so many kids over the years, high school students, young college students, and I show up with their potential. And I've worked with so many leaders, and I've only had two in my entire life that made me feel that way. One was a assistant manager at a Coco's fast food, like a high end Denny's restaurant, and the other one was Jack Welch. The only two out of the thousands that showed up that way. Does that kind of align with what you've seen? Like, there's a lot of very capable leaders, but very few show up the way it appears that you have throughout your career for the folks you work with.
Yeah, and I'm the recipient of that, right? So, I write about it in my book. My first job out of college was with the Bell System, and I was a salesperson selling to auto parts stores in Northeast Ohio. And 2 months in, I hadn't hit my quota at all. And my boss, her name was Lena Porter. I'll never forget her. She had a couple of options. She could have put me on a performance improvement plan. She could have actually fired me because I went 2 months without any near my quota, or she could do what she did. She took the time to say, "Let me see what's wrong." And so she had me present to her after hours, and she said, "Okay, here's what I see. Here's your issues with your presentation. Let's work on that. Let's talk about your delivery." And then more importantly, she paired me with a gentleman who was a top salesperson at the time, and I spent 2 weeks shadowing him because she said, "You need to see what good looks like." And almost overnightly, I went from someone who should have gotten fired to one of the better salespeople and ultimately a sales manager at that organization. But it was only because she decided to lend a hand instead of pull the trigger. And I think leaders. Again, when someone's not performing, to me, is that they're unwilling or unable. If they're unable, let me try and help them. If they're unwilling, that's a different conversation. And so to your point, I was a beneficiary of that, and that let me lend grace and give that same grace to others.
Yeah, what was that growth moment like for you? Was there just, oh, I didn't realize these are four things I should have been doing, or oh my gosh, were there a lot of epiphanies in there for you at that moment?
What it was I had a lot of textbook knowledge and not a lot of practical knowledge, right? And so I had seen it, from a textbook perspective, but when you get into the real world in front of a customer and you have to overcome objections, if you're not trained in that, it becomes a very difficult conversation, right? And so what helped mostly is going back to what she did last, and that's let me see what good looks like. Because I think if you can see what good looks like, even though maybe I'm imitating, this guy Preston for a little while, it eventually became my own style. You know, he talked about here are the 7 steps to the sale key. Here are buying, and so these are things that back in the day when we had apprenticeships, you could learn and get from others, and so that was the aha moment for me. And so again, when I see someone not performing, the first thing I try and do is help them get better because typically they're unable as opposed to unwilling.
I think it's great to be exposed to individuals getting it done in the right way, like being successful. I'm actually here at my home recording studio and I play guitar. There's probably 50 plus guitars hanging around here. And I've run into a number of guitar players that I've been able to hang out with that watching them play and what they do, it was almost like when Bannister broke the 4 minute mile. Oh, it's possible. And like just a ton of that. And I think the same thing goes for leaders. And that goes to my next question. I've always felt like if you're alone as a leader or even a parent in a family, it's by choice because you can build your community going out there. So when you talk about in the book avoiding leadership isolation, what's your advice around that? Like what happens when you do it and how can you encourage folks to build their community or join something?
Yeah, these jobs, if you're not careful, can be very isolating and lonely, but they don't have to be. And the reason that they can be is because the higher you go in an organization, there's information you have that you can't share. There's strategies, there's things that are happening. And so you're a very tight circle of people who you can communicate with that. What I've done is I tried to find outside organizations like the Executive Leadership Council or some groups on LinkedIn where, again, I'm around people who are like-minded people the boards I sit on. I love that because I get to interact with people who again are in these same spaces. And you need that because one, you need someone to bounce ideas off of. Iron sharpens iron. And again, when I'm around those folks who are thought leaders, when I'm around those folks who understand the day-to-day pressures, to understand, what pressures a board can put on you or, the analyst can put on you, you feel like you're not alone. But if you, don't surround yourself, if you're not social, and it can be everything from around the golf every Saturday, at the country club, but you have to find a way to stay connected with people and people who understand what you're going through.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Another thing that stood out in the book for me was you had this graphic, and it was 50% performance, 25% exposure, 25% perception, and then I wrote down if perception is reality, so is reputation. It's like, oh my gosh, you could have everything blowing up around you and not in a good way, and thinking things are fine because you weren't paying attention to these. So walk through that if you could.
Yeah, I think to be successful, in any of our roles as leaders or even just, rank and file, 50% of it has to be a performance. And when I say performance, consistent performance, acceptable performance, you know, you got to have that. That's table stakes. But that only takes you so far. The next piece of that stool in that leg is what I call exposure, right? It's what have you exposed to? So, when I talk to organizations or young people, I said, okay, in your organization, what are the 4 to 5 leadership traits they look for in a leader? They typically don't know. What were some of the 3 things that your CEO said last quarterly outing that, they didn't know? Well, here's all of it. I mean, you need to be exposed to that. You need to understand how your company makes money. You need to understand what commitments, your CEO is making to the street, what have you. And they also need to know who you are and the value you bring. So give me your elevator pitch. What are, if I walk into you and you walk into the elevator, what do you want me to know about you? And so exposing yourself so that you're aware with the right information, the right people, and the right people in your organization. Every organization, that does succession planning, there are people who are influenced that could influence your career that you may not be aware of. So are you, making those relationships within the organization? And then last but not least, perception. What is your brand? I tell people you have a personal brand, whether you realize it or not. And I'm a car fanatic. And so I talk about, if I say ultimate driving machine, most people will say BMW. If I say a car known for safety, a lot of folks will say Volvo. If I say sexiest car on the road, you might get Tesla or what have you. But if I say Yugo, to those of you old enough to remember the car called the Yugo that was back in the late 70s, a Yugoslavian car, the joke was sometimes you go and sometimes you don't. The reality of it is you need to know within your organization, are you the BMW? Are you the Volvo? Are you the Tesla? Or are you viewed as the Yugo? And you have to manage what that brand is. As a leader, this, Lee, everything about you gives a signal. Everything about you is watched from afar and up close. And you have to be self-aware and have the emotional intelligence to understand that.
Yeah, in the larger companies you work with, did they do a good job of helping people develop self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, et cetera, emotional intelligence?
Very few, quite honestly. It was typically up to your leader or your leader's leader to have that vision to say, okay, hey, let's do some workshops on emotional intelligence. Let's show what goods look, customer service videos of, here's a customer returning something. Here's one way to take that return. Here's a different way to take, and so helping them understand, hey, cashier, that smile, being friendly does so much more. And so making them aware, but using yourself and being vulnerable enough to say, hey, here's where maybe I didn't do it the right way. But you have to do that because I think, most people want to do better. They just don't know how or what that looks like.
Yeah. I've always done it because for me it was a velocity play. If the team members were on average a lot more emotionally mature, self-regulated, aware, we could execute significantly faster, not plowing through a lot of overreactive emotions, if you will. And I realize we're all emotional beings. I totally get it. But wow, did it make a difference in such a positive way? So imagine 540 team members, you come on board, even if you're a frontline team member coming in that's washing parts, aircraft parts, you're going to get a personality assessment. And every quarter, you're going to be able to sit down with somebody to talk to you about what that means, how to relate to others. It was expensive, but oh my gosh, did it make us so much more profitable and more valuable when we sold one day?
Yeah, and big companies will do that for high potential folks. But I think that there's a level that everyone can play at to again become self-aware, understanding your strengths and what I call your lesser strengths, putting plans in place to address those, those development plans that many times are just kind of cut and paste and and not really taken seriously. I loved it when I worked for leaders who took that seriously. And every quarter after we reviewed the numbers in the business, we reviewed that development plan to say, hey, what other experience does Keith need? Maybe he needs to do a small tour of duty in marketing to understand, or maybe he needs to go to real estate, and so that's where the growth comes in. A lot of us are leaders because Lee, we touched a lot of bases. We know a lot of things. Not that we're master of any of them, but we, are competent enough to have seen, the company from various vantage points.
I feel like we get way better at connecting dots and making better decisions based on that to create more value as a team or an organization. And I'm working on ways to try to speed up that wisdom to be able to do it. If we're just intentional about it, I feel like if we're intentional and with leadership development to actually develop it, we can go faster. But what do you say? Is it just time and it just takes what it takes, or can you more intentionally get there faster?
I think you can intentionally get there faster. One time I was running a grocery store chain, and there was friction between the supply chain folks bringing the groceries and the products into the store and my stocking team. And I got sick of this arguing back and forth. So for about a week, we had them switch roles. I had my stocking guys go on the trucks and see what it took to delivery and get stuck in traffic. And it's Philadelphia weather and it's a blizzard, and they got an appreciation of what the trucker goes through. And then the trucker gets to the store, and they serve the stockman, and they got to see the pressures of what happens when there's out of stock, and the customer wants Heinz ketchup, and there's no Heinz ketchup. And I think once we understand the pressures of our peers and our partners, and we look at it from a team perspective, I think you get better results because again, there's an appreciation, there's an understanding of, hey, that truck wasn't late because he wanted to be late. He was late because there was a reason. Oh, by the way, these stockers, aren't just lazy. There's nothing for them to do. And so it was really a good exercise.
Yeah, yeah. Seeing that bigger pictures really helps in explaining it. You talk a lot about that in the book, which is awesome. Something else in the book, technology disruption. Like, how do you make change and disruption a competency, for the culture in there? And AI is such a big part of the conversation. I feel like once you get past, oh, look at all these things it can do, which is pretty amazing, you still have to create value in the business. And to me, it's like this incredible tool to help you do that. It's not a thing just in itself. So people are never going away, and there's more work to do the more we use AI in my different businesses for people. What's your take on that? Hopefully, something positive for our listeners. So I'm super.
It really is. We've had technology shifts many, many times. Now, I have to admit that these shifts, what used to take 10 to 15 years are now taking 2 to 3. But AI is just a tool. And so the one thing I talk to leaders about is making sure people understand, whenever there's change in technology or transformation, what's the relevance of it? Why are we having to make this change? Is it the customer buying habit has changed? Is it shopping has? What's the relevance? Because if they understand the why, then you go to the readiness. How ready are your organization? We're really change resistant as people. Not until we understand the why or the relevance of why do we kind of get it. So let's make sure we're ready for it. Then the robustness. AI is not going to come in and replace everyone's job today or tomorrow, right? It will not do. It can't replace many jobs. And then the responsiveness of it. Once we roll this out, and typically people are rolling it out internally before they're doing any customer facing or externally things with it. What will the impact be? A real quick analogy. At Walmart, there was technology where we had automatic floor scrubbers. There were automatic stocking machines. Well, they didn't replace everybody. They had fewer stockers, and those people then went and did other roles that didn't exist before. AI will be the same way. AI will create jobs that didn't exist before. It will create opportunities that didn't exist before. And so, hang on, this too will change. Again, a lot of the menial work, a lot of repetitive things, some of the process things that are low value will probably be absorbed. But, AI can't, the joke I say is, AI may be able to tell you that a tomato is a fruit, but wisdom will tell you you don't put it in a fruit salad. So
It's got me wondering what that would actually taste like. Wouldn't it be funny if it tasted good? But somebody came up with peanut butter and chocolate, and that worked out.
you never know.
Yep, you never know. And did I hear that right? That Walmart, when they would displace some employees, it would train them in trades like HVAC, electrical.
Oh, it's incredible, and I was glad to be a part of that. They opened up Walmart Academy, and the first demand came for truck drivers about 6, 7 years ago. It was a very difficult time finding truck drivers, and so we went to our associate base and said, "Hey, how many of you want to get your CDLs and be a truck driver?" And so that was a group that came on. We opened up Walmart Academy, a trades academy where we do HVAC training, plumbing, and electrical because the trades are never going to go away. In fact, as they build more data centers and these types of things, and so giving these folks the opportunity to go to what they call Live Better Live Better University is Walmart's little own college. And these people are being repurposed and going from, hourly jobs of, $15 an hour to, much substantial and without a college degree and any of those types of things. And so really it's a unique experiment that's working just fabulous.
I mean, that's just incredible. I mean, more companies should be doing that. I mean, that's a future of humanity play in my view. It's like we're all in this together. Let's keep rising and doing it. I've heard you talk about work-life balance, managed imbalance. I always think of it as just one big blended life where we're making choices and holding it. Like I love managed imbalance. So talk about that. How'd you come up with that?
Yeah, about 15 years ago, the whole work-life balance conversation started to happen. And I just had a real, unvarnished truth conversation with my team. And I said, hey, let's get this right. There will be times when we have to put our nose to the grindstone and maybe 85, 90% of your effort that week is going to be on the job because something big's happening and your family only gets 10%. There will be other times when you have family events, when there's things that happen, sickness, death, celebration, whatever it is, where you can take that time and maybe the job doesn't get 90% that week. Maybe we only get 70%. And, instead of that 50-50, I call it managed imbalance. You only have 100%, but there's days and times, when you have to, do more for the family. And the reason that was important to me, Lee, is because when I retired a few years ago, my kids, I have 4 adult kids, all in their 40s, some one's, I think, late 30s. And I took them out spend quality time. And each one of them talked about a time I missed something important in their upbringing. My son, hey, Dad, you weren't there for senior night to walk me out on the basketball court. My daughter, Dad, you weren't there for father-daughter dance. I had to go, with Uncle Kyle, and those things kind of stung. And I said, well, I did all that so you can, have the stuff and then the exposure and the new Jordans. And they said, hey, we appreciate the stuff, Dad. We would have wanted more of you. And so, I don't have regrets, but if I had a do-over, I didn't have to be at every presentation. Again, there was something inside of me, my own insecurity that said I had to be there. I had to be there. But again, I'm a better grandfather because of it. But again, you have to have some about balance in your life. Companies will love you, but your family's going to be there for you.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure they were proud of how you were showing up as a leader in the community and the difference you were making. There's all of that. And I look at every family member as they all have the potential to be amazing leaders in the family, and even if I can't make it, I'm really appreciative of or somebody couldn't make it for an event, appreciative of how they're showing up as a leader, but we make the time when we can. Like we understand that, but I think everybody can be a leader. My definition of leadership is creating value with and through others, and by that definition, literally everybody's a leader. And then the only question is, do you want to up it a notch? Do you have a definition of leadership that you've landed on?
No, I think leadership is really, helping people to be the best that they can be, bringing out their best and helping them to be the best, whatever that looks like. And, giving them the tools, and then getting out of the way. Too often, when I was a first time leader, I wanted everybody to sell my way, and, 'cause my way I know works for me. But real leaders understand that, there's 5 ways we can go from, Atlanta to California. You can fly, you can take a boat, and understand that the destination is there. We may get there differently, uh, but helping whatever it is to do to be the best that they can be, and that to me is a leader's job is again to create future leaders.
I love that. 100% agree. Uh, you're currently a board member on at least one board. Is that true?
That's correct. I'm on the board of directors of Brinks Inc., the Brinks truck folks. Yes.
Okay. Question about boards. I get to interact with a fair number of them, and rarely do I see one that's as productive as it could be. So I feel like a board, it's all about ensuring the right governance. And I look at, let's say, for the example, the handoff when Jack Welch left. I think the board really messed up, and you saw what happened to. And I met so many people over the years that had a huge amount of money that went down to tens of thousands of dollars because all that value was destroyed, and the board missed it. So what's your take on what a board should be doing, and also what have you observed about how productive boards actually are, how effective they are on average?
Yeah, I think there needs to always be a certain healthy tension between management and the board. And I call it healthy tension, where the board, in their role of being a governance body, pushes and pods and stress tests the ideas and the strategies that come out. I think too often boards just kind of accept, what's presented to them as, I won't say cookie cutter, but, hey, they see some pretty slides and, and they say, hey, they don't ask the tougher questions. And so one, I think, being able to have those unvarnished truth conversations to kind of push and prod and poke and stress test these ideas to see if they really do make sense. Also to people, when we look at succession planning and leadership ELT planning, making sure that we're not just looking at someone's performance, but there's a character piece of that. How do they show up, in front of people? Are they, because again, I would using your example, Jack was a high bar to kind of, but whoever replaced him did not have that same skill set, right? That same bedside manner, that same concern for people. And so again, I think boards kind of are that litmus test that says, okay, you think this is a good idea, management? Let's push, prop, push back, and we'll get to something that's better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've just learned to almost just, I guess, simply prove it. I hear what you say. I see your pretty slides. Prove it to me. And a lot of times it's not completely true. And so I think that's a big part of a board's job is to make sure that it's what they're saying is reflecting what's actually happening out there.
And to do that, you have to be involved more than just looking at, a board deck, 2 weeks before the meeting or 2 days before the meeting. For me, it was, going to a Brinks facility to see how they were handling the money. Again, even when I got to the grocery business at Walmart and other places, I changed oil, I fried chicken, I baked cakes, I iced dough. I mean, I did all that because I wanted to see up under the hood. And when you do that and you're close enough to the business where you can observe it, I don't care how fancy your deck of slides are in your PowerPoint presentation, it won't hold up to scrutiny.
Yeah. Yeah. Even when I do keynote speaking, and I know you do that as well. I'll, I'll go to their meetings the day before the conference starts.
Absolutely.
Sit in the room and just get a feel, and everything is so much better when you have a feel for what's really going on. I get the sense that you do a lot of the same stuff. Yeah.
Do a lot of, I like to get there the day before, the evening before, at least, to spend some time before the folks know who I am, the rank and file, and kind of listen to, I call it ear hustling to some conversations to see, I know what the company says, but what am I hearing? What's the scuttlebutt? And then when you get to do your keynotes, you can talk in terms that, they can relate to, and it's, more meaningful because you're speaking their language and you're speaking actually their thoughts many times.
That's probably, again, why you're so effective and received well. You've set the record for the most notes I've taken getting ready for a discussion with one of my guests. We'll never get to all of this. It's just fascinating. The last thing I want to get into here, and all this is so good. The 5S, the faith, focus, fortitude, fearlessness, fellowship. How'd you develop that? How do you use that, in your life and how you lead?
Yeah, about 18 years ago, I was acknowledged by Morehouse College as leader, Renaissance leader, what have you, and they wanted me to speak to a group of young men. And the group of young men asked me, "Hey, if you could go back to your 18, 19, 20-year-old self, what advice would you give?" And it was kind of on the fly. And I said, well, the first thing is, I talk about faith because you have to have faith in yourself. Because there's times when, you'll doubt yourself. There's times when others will doubt you and you got to hold on to that faith. And for me, I had that faith in a higher power that when things weren't going right, that there would be a better day. There would be a brighter day. So faith is first. Second is focus. We can't be all things to all people and you have to prioritize your life. We only get 24 hours in a day. And you have to focus that. And I use my examples of in college in my fraternity. Yeah, I partied with the best of them. But if I knew there was a midterm exam or a paper due, I knew when to leave the party. You got to know when to leave the party and focus. Fearlessness. Most of us don't achieve what we could achieve, not because we can't, but because we're afraid to try. Michael Jordan wrote a book many years ago. He says, I can accept many things, but I can't accept not trying. And so fearlessness says, hey, I'm going to get knocked down. And just know that, it's not the absence of fear. It's walking, knowing that fear is there. And then fortitude, it's not how many times you get knocked down, how many times you get back up, because you're going to get knocked down. Doesn't mean that, the best, Mike Tyson got knocked down, Muhammad Ali got knocked, it's what do you do when you get back up? And then the last one I have to give to my grandmother. It's that fellowship. Birds of a feather flock together. As a child, she would always tell me, hey, hang with the students who are studying, hang with the kids who aren't doing this. And it's like my buddy said, show me 9 broke people that you hang with and you'll be the 10th. However, show me 9 millionaires and you'll be the 10th. And so making sure you're surrounding yourself with people who challenge you, who give you, honest feedback. Too often when you become a leader, you get that watered down. No one wants to tell the emperor he has no clothes or she has no clothes. Give people the right to kind of, hey, Keith, your presentation the other day, you were a little too harsh or what have you. And fellowship with people who uplift you and inspire you. And again, going back to what you said earlier, who understand your struggle.
Yeah. I've really learned to value struggle. Like we can't develop without effort, whether it's mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. So I just know the harder it gets, this is going to be even better when I come out the other side. Did you have a point where you learned that?
Absolutely. I learned that you're either in a storm, coming out of one, or about to go in one. But I will tell you, and I tell people, my successes may have inspired me, but my missteps and my failures is what really taught me. And so to me, it's only a failure if you didn't learn from it. And so I don't look at failure the same way many people do. I look at it as a learning experience. And again, you don't keep failing at the same thing. But I don't spend much time talking about my successes because, they're inspirational. But, when I talk to young people and they need to see that, hey, even leaders make mistakes. Too often, Lee, we put up our press clippings and our plaques and our awards. They need to see, hey, Keith almost got fired at IBM because he was a bull in the china shop. Hey, Keith, when he became president of Pitney Bowes, they gave him an executive coach because he was a bully in the boardroom. You have to be able to have that transparent conversation and be vulnerable enough so they don't think that, everything's a highlight reel.
Yeah. Yeah, my biggest, I guess we want to just measure it by money failure from a business that I was trying to get going was writing off 27 million bucks. Like, okay, that didn't work. Like, yuck. But to your point, I learned so much out of that I can leverage that will likely make me a whole lot more than that in the future and have a giant impact in a really good way with the communities that we serve. Yeah, struggle is good. I think it really is.
It really, I tease my kids, because they grew up upper middle class as opposed to me growing up poor. And I tell them, guys, you guys have a lot of stuff, but, you didn't get to struggle. And so, I hope that when those winds of adversity hit you, you stand strong because, you grew up with, a different experience than dad. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and, for me, the challenge is how do we create an environment within families where they can move in that direction and understand that stuff and develop kids, hopefully from as early as age as possible, that to be these amazing value creating adults, character, belief structure, capabilities. And it feels like we make it so much easier year over year with the best of intentions that by the time kids become 18, I was on my own financially self-reliant, no backstop whatsoever at 17. But kids today, when I ask them, would you like to be self-reliant as an adult someday when you get there? Like, absolutely. About what age do you think you'll get there? 12 years ago, when I started doing this, it would be around 20. If you said 19, early 20s, it's grown into the mid 30s. Some even say in their 40s. Like, what? But I think it's a belief structure. What do you think?
I think it's a belief structure. I often joke about, when I came up playing sports, you only got to play if you were good. My kids came up and it was everybody got a trophy, everybody got a medal, everybody got to play. And then you go into the real world. The real world's just not that way, right? And eventually, I think they will get there. But again, I think there's some lessons that we learned earlier, you and I, just because of how we were raised and the environment at times, that this group may get a little later. To your point, I was self-sufficient from 16 on, right? Paid my own way through college. And so again, my kids are just now realizing in their 40s, wow, we don't have any student loan debt. Dad was okay, huh? So,
Well, Keith, this has been fantastic for me. Thank you for writing the book, sharing all of your wisdom. If our listeners want to learn more about your work or connect with you, how can they do that?
yeah, the first place I'd say is my website, keithwyche.com, KeithWyche. I also post on LinkedIn at least weekly. I have a Substack that's out there. And I would just say, get this book. It's a great book for yourself. It's a great book for your boss. It's a great book for your proteges and mentors and mentees. So, but that's how you find me. Instagram, keithwyche.com or LinkedIn.
I'm going to buy books for all 30 CEOs that I coach. I'm in different mastermind groups and some individually. So they're all getting a copy of your books. You should see a nice little 30 book bump here, coming up. So
I appreciate that. If you want me to come back and have a conversation with them as well, I'd be up for that too.
that would be amazing. I may take you up on that for sure. Well, Keith, thanks again for being here. This has been fantastic.
Lee, thank you so much. I enjoyed the conversation.
And this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of today's episode, please like and subscribe. And until next time, show your value to the world.